This is HOA busted. The cones came out and so did the receipts. Karen stood beside my car with the tow driver and screamed that I was parked in a winter emergency zone and the hook was going on unless I moved it immediately. I am calling management, and you will not like what happens next. The tow truck idled behind me, yellow strobes bouncing off the snowbanks piled along the curb, and the driver had one hand on the control lever waiting for her signal. It was 4:45 in the morning. Freezing rain had turned the overnight slush into glass, and I was already late for my gym manager shift because the gate access code had failed twice, and I had to call the emergency line just to get out of my own neighborhood. Michelle Parker, election committee chair for the Cold Front Cove Ridge Association, wore a red parka with the hood up and gripped a snow pusher like she was guarding a border crossing. Her tight red ponytail stuck out under a blue knit hat, and she held a laminated quiet hours notice in her other hand, the same one she had posted on every mailbox cluster during snowblower season. I sat in the driver's seat with my seatbelt still on, a tabbed binder tucked under my arm on the passenger seat, and my phone recording audio in my coat pocket. She did not know about the recording. I did not correct her lie about the emergency zone, because I wanted her to commit to it in public. This started 3 weeks earlier when the first snow hit Alpharetta, Georgia, and the HOA group text exploded with Michelle demanding close-up pictures of every driveway, sidewalk edge, and mailbox approach by noon the next day. The text called it unauthorized community messaging. She followed up with a certified letter to my address stating that failure to provide photographic proof of snow removal within 12 hours of any accumulation would result in escalating fines starting at $200. The letter pretended the snow policy was law. I work early morning open shifts at the gym, sometimes 4 or 5 a.m. starts, and I do not have time to stand in my driveway with a tape measure and a camera every time frost appears on the grass. I sent the photos the first time. Michelle replied within 10 minutes with a follow-up demand, close-ups of the walkway edges, measurements in inches of remaining ice, and a second set taken from a different angle to prove I had not just moved the snow to a non-compliant location. I ignored the second demand. 2 days later, another certified letter arrived with a $400 invoice for non-compliance and a notice that my case would be reviewed at the next board meeting. The invoice had no itemization, no reference to any actual rule number, just a paragraph about winter safety standards and community responsibility. I am a gym manager. I open the facility at 5 a.m. most days, sometimes earlier for member events or staff training. If the gate system fails, or if I get blocked in by a tow truck or compliance inspection, I lose my job. That is the stakes here. Michelle knew that. She had asked my schedule during a neighborhood cookout 6 months earlier, back when she was pretending to be friendly, and I had told her I work nights and early mornings. Now she was using it. The Cold Front Cove Ridge Association is one of those communities where leadership treats neighbors like suspects during winter. Every snowfall triggers a wave of violation notices. Every freeze means someone is getting photographed and fined, and every board meeting ends with Michelle standing at the podium, reading off a list of names like a roll call for detention. The neighborhood is clean, the homes are nice, but the HOA runs on fear and paperwork. Michelle has been election committee chair for 4 years, which means she controls the ballots, the proxies, and the timeline for every board vote. People do not challenge her because she makes sure the rules favor whoever stays quiet. The morning after the second letter, Michelle showed up at my door at 6:15 a.m. with a clipboard and a tape measure. She knocked hard enough to wake up half the block. I opened the door in my gym uniform, keys in hand, already 15 minutes behind schedule. She did not say hello. She said, "I am here to conduct a forced photo inspection per the winter compliance addendum, and you are required to accompany me to verify measurements." I told her I was leaving for work and she could come back later. She said, "Keep talking. I love adding notes." Then she took 3 pictures of my front walkway with her phone, turned around and left. I got a third certified letter that afternoon. This one demanded $900 and threatened a lien if payment was not received within 10 business days. I called the management company. They told me Michelle had submitted documentation and that all fines were authorized under the seasonal enforcement protocol. I asked to see the documentation. They said it was under review and would be available at the hearing. I asked when the hearing was. They said Michelle would notify me. I asked if I could contest the fines before the hearing. They said I could submit a written statement, but the board had final authority and all decisions were binding unless overturned by a supermajority vote of homeowners, which required 67% participation. The neighborhood has 300 units. Turnout for the last election was 11%. I started keeping records. I printed every email, every letter, every text message Michelle sent to the group chat. I made a spreadsheet of every fine issued in the neighborhood over the past 2 winters and cross-referenced the dates with weather reports and management company invoices. The numbers did not match. Michelle had billed the HOA for emergency snow removal services on dates when no snow had fallen. She had charged the association for sidewalk salt on weeks when the temperature never dropped below 40 degrees. And she had issued fines to 17 homeowners for non-compliance during a single January weekend, when the neighborhood plow contractor was off-site at a wedding and no removal had been scheduled. I had an ally. Her name was Denise, and she sat on the Architectural Review Committee. She had been on the board longer than Michelle and knew the backstory. 3 years ago, Michelle had tried to push through a rule change that would have given the election committee unilateral authority to disqualify ballots for minor errors, but Denise had blocked it by threatening to quit and go public. Michelle never forgave her. Denise told me Michelle had been manipulating proxies for years, holding ballots until after the deadline and then claiming they arrived late, and using her position to bury complaints before they reached the full board. Denise also told me the management company was scared of Michelle because she had threatened to sue them twice, once over a billing dispute and once over a maintenance delay, and both times they had settled quietly to avoid the cost of litigation. Denise gave me a copy of the HOA budget records for the past 3 years. The records showed selective enforcement everywhere. Michelle had fined 3 homeowners for snow removal delays during a week, when her own driveway was completely blocked by a snowdrift and no fine was issued. She had charged the association for a winter vendor meeting that never happened. And she had amended the quiet hours policy to ban snowblowers before 7 a.m., then exempted her own contractor from the rule and fined 2 neighbors who complained. I made copies of everything. I put the originals in a binder with tabbed sections and kept the digital files on my phone. I did not tell Michelle. I did not tell the management company. I waited. The escalation came fast. 2 days after I missed the payment deadline, I got a notice taped to my front door stating that my gate access code had been temporarily suspended pending resolution of outstanding fines. I called the management company. They said Michelle had requested the suspension under the delinquent account protocol. I told them I was contesting the fines. They said the suspension would remain in place until the hearing. I asked when the hearing was. They said Michelle would notify me. I could not get out of my neighborhood. The gate system was the only exit, and the code was tied to my account. I tried the emergency override. It did not work. I called the management company again. They told me they would send a technician within 48 hours. I told them I had to be at work in 90 minutes. They said they would note the urgency. I called my gym. I told them I was locked in my neighborhood. They told me to figure it out or find someone to cover my shift. I did not have anyone to cover. I drove to the gate and waited. A maintenance worker in a reflective vest was clearing snow from the call box. I asked him if he could override the gate. He said he did not have the authority. I asked him if he could call someone. He said he already did. I waited another 20 minutes. The gate finally opened. I was 40 minutes late. Michelle was waiting in the parking lot when I got home. She had a clipboard, a camera, and the snow pusher propped against the curb like a barrier. She said, "You violated quiet hours by running your engine at the gate for more than 5 minutes. That is another fine." I told her I was locked out because she suspended my access. She said, "Go ahead and call whoever you want, I have a committee for that." I did not argue. I got out of my car, walked past her, and went inside. She took pictures of my car, my front door, and the walkway. I watched through the window. She spent 10 minutes measuring the distance between my mailbox and the curb, taking notes, and moving the snow pusher to different positions like she was marking territory. The next morning, another certified letter. This one stated that my vehicle had been parked in a winter emergency zone overnight and that the association had authorized towing at owner expense. I read it twice. There was no winter emergency zone in the parking lot. The map attached to the letter showed a red outline around 3 spaces near the front entrance, but those spaces had never been marked, never been mentioned in any previous communication, and never been included in the original HOA rules. I checked the governing documents. Nothing. I checked the amendments filed with the county. Nothing. Michelle had invented the zone. I did not correct her. I wanted her to commit. If you are enjoying this chaos, hit that like button and subscribe because this story is about to get even wilder. I called Denise. I told her about the emergency zone. She laughed and said Michelle had tried the same thing 2 years ago with a fire lane designation that was completely fake, and the management company had quietly removed the notices after a homeowner threatened to call the fire marshal. I asked Denise if she would testify at the hearing. She said she would do better than that. She said she would request an audit of the winter vendor charges and force Michelle to provide receipts for every service billed to the association. I asked her how long that would take. She said 2 weeks if the management company cooperated, 2 months if they did not. I told her I had 9 days before the lien was filed. She said, "Then you better have a plan." I had a plan. I was going to email the proof to every homeowner right before the hearing so Michelle walked into an ambush. The proof was the budget records, the selective enforcement spreadsheet, and an audio recording I had made at the last board meeting where Michelle admitted she had backdated a violation notice to trigger a late fee faster. I had not told anyone about the recording. I had not even told Denise. I was holding it for the right moment. The problem was timing. I had to travel for an out-of-town obligation in 6 days, a family event I could not skip, and if Michelle called an emergency meeting while I was gone, I would lose my chance to present the evidence in person. I needed to force the hearing to happen on my schedule, not hers. I filed a formal complaint with the management company. I cited the governing documents, the county ordinances, and the lack of any recorded winter emergency zone designation. I demanded an immediate hearing and requested that the complaint be added to the agenda for the next regular board meeting. The management company replied within 2 hours. They said Michelle had reviewed my complaint and determined it was without merit. They said the hearing would proceed as scheduled, but they did not give me a date. That night, I got a group text. Michelle had sent a message to the entire neighborhood stating that unauthorized parking enforcement actions were being taken against multiple homeowners, and that anyone who failed to comply with winter emergency protocols would face immediate towing and fines up to $1,500. The message included a map. The red zone had expanded. It now covered half the guest parking lot and 3 additional spaces near my building. I replied to the group text. I said the emergency zone was not in the governing documents and asked Michelle to provide the amendment number and filing date. She replied within seconds. "Keep talking. I love adding notes." Then she sent a second message stating that my response constituted harassment of a board member and that she was forwarding the thread to the management company for disciplinary review. 2 neighbors replied in my defense. One asked where the zone was marked. Another asked why the map had changed. Michelle did not respond to them. She removed both of them from the group chat. Denise sent me a private message. She said Michelle was panicking, and that panic makes her reckless. She said to keep pushing. I kept pushing. I sent a second formal complaint to the management company. This time I attached the budget records, the selective enforcement spreadsheet, and a list of 12 questions about the winter vendor charges. I copied Denise and requested that the complaint be distributed to the full board. The management company did not reply. The tow truck showed up 3 days later. It was 4:45 in the morning. I was already in my car, engine running, seatbelt on, ready to leave for my shift. Michelle was standing next to the driver, pointing at my car and yelling that I was parked in a winter emergency zone and the hook was going on unless I moved it immediately. The driver looked uncomfortable. He kept glancing at the pavement, at the snowbanks, at the complete absence of any painted lines or posted signs. Michelle handed him a piece of paper. He read it, shook his head, and said something I could not hear. Michelle raised her voice. "I am calling management and you will not like what happens next." I got out of the car. I had the binder under my arm. I had my phone recording in my pocket. I walked up to the driver and asked him what the paper said. He showed me. It was a tow authorization form signed by Michelle, dated that morning, stating that my vehicle was in violation of emergency parking restrictions and that the HOA had authorized immediate removal. I asked him if he had verified the zone designation. He said he had not. I asked him if he had contacted the management company. He said Michelle told him she was the contact. I told him the zone did not exist. Michelle screamed, "You cannot do that. You cannot show him anything. That is private HOA business." I told her the governing documents were public record and that I had every right to share them with a third-party vendor operating on association property. She stepped closer. Her face was red. She said, "I am filing a formal complaint against you for obstruction, and you will be fined for every second you delay this tow." The driver looked at me, looked at her, and put the control lever back in the neutral position. He said, "I am not hooking this car until I verify the zone with the property manager." Michelle yelled at him. He got back in the truck and drove away. She turned to me. "Go ahead and call whoever you want, I have a committee for that." I did not respond. I got back in my car and left for work. She took pictures of my license plate as I drove away. That afternoon, I got an email from the management company. It said the board had scheduled an emergency meeting for the following evening to address multiple violations, and that my attendance was mandatory. The email did not include an agenda. It did not include a list of violations. It just said mandatory attendance required, and failure to appear would result in automatic fines and suspension of privileges. I forwarded the email to Denise. She called me 10 minutes later. She said Michelle had bypassed the regular meeting schedule and called the emergency session without notifying the full board, which violated the bylaws. She said if I showed up and challenged the meeting on procedural grounds, Michelle would have to either cancel it or admit she broke the rules. I asked Denise if she would be there. She said she would. I asked her what I should bring. She said everything. The meeting was in the clubhouse. Michelle sat at the head of the table with 2 other board members, both of whom looked confused about why they were there. Denise sat in the back row with her arms crossed. I sat in the front row with the binder on my lap. Michelle called the meeting to order and said we were here to address chronic non-compliance and harassment of board leadership. She did not say my name. She did not need to. Everyone knew. She started with the parking violation. She said I had been warned multiple times about parking in a winter emergency zone and that I had obstructed a lawful tow by interfering with the vendor. I raised my hand. She ignored me. She said the association had incurred costs due to my obstruction and that I was liable for those costs plus additional fines for insubordination. I stood up. She said, "Sit down or I will have you removed." I said, "The emergency zone does not exist. Show me the amendment." Michelle opened a folder. She pulled out a piece of paper and held it up. She said, "This is the amendment." I said, "Read it into the minutes." She hesitated. One of the other board members said, "Yeah, let us hear it." Michelle started reading. It was a memo, not an amendment. It was dated 2 weeks ago. It referenced a winter emergency protocol but did not include any map, any designation, or any approval vote. I interrupted. I said, "That is not an amendment. That is a memo you wrote. Where is the board vote? Where is the county filing?" She slammed the folder shut. She said, "You are out of order." I said, "No, you are out of procedure. This meeting was called without proper notice, without an agenda, and without quorum verification. You violated the bylaws." Denise stood up. She said, "He is right. This meeting is invalid." Michelle lost it. She stood up, pointed at me, and yelled, "You think you can come in here and challenge me? You think you know how this works?" I have been running this board for 4 years and I will run it for 4 more, and there is nothing you can do about it because I control the ballots, I control the proxies, and I control who gets to vote. Go ahead and call whoever you want, I have a committee for that. I opened the binder. I pulled out the budget records and handed them to the board member on my left. I said, "These are the winter vendor charges for the past 3 years. Michelle billed the HOA for snow removal on dates when no snow fell. She billed for sidewalk salt during weeks when the temperature never dropped below 40 degrees. And she issued fines to 17 homeowners during a weekend when the plow contractor was off-site and no removal was scheduled." The board member started reading. The other board member leaned over to look. Michelle said, "Those are private financial records and you had no authority to access them." Denise stood up again. She said, "They are HOA budget records and every homeowner has a right to review them. I provided them under the transparency clause." Michelle turned on her. She said, "You are suspended from this meeting for insubordination." Denise laughed. She said, "You cannot suspend a board member without a vote, and you do not have the votes." I kept going. I pulled out the selective enforcement spreadsheet. I said, "This is a record of every fine issued in the last 2 winters. Michelle fined 3 homeowners for snow removal delays during a week when her own driveway was completely blocked and no fine was issued. She charged the association for a winter vendor meeting that never happened. And she amended the quiet hours policy to ban snowblowers before 7 a.m., then exempted her own contractor and fined 2 neighbors who complained." The board member on my left looked at Michelle. He said, "Is this true?" Michelle said, "Those are out of context, and he is twisting the facts." I said, "Then let us add context." I pulled out my phone. I said, "This is an audio recording from the last board meeting." In this recording, Michelle admits she backdated a violation notice to trigger a late fee faster. "Do you want me to play it?" The room went silent. Michelle stared at me. Her face went from red to white. She said, "You cannot record board meetings without permission." I said, "The bylaws do not prohibit recording, and you never asked if anyone was recording." She looked at the other board members. Neither of them said anything. She looked at Denise. Denise smiled. Michelle grabbed her folder, her coat, and the snow pusher. She said, "I am not staying here to be ambushed by a conspiracy. This meeting is over." She walked out. The door slammed behind her. One of the board members looked at me and said, "Can you send us that recording?" I sent the recording to both board members and copied Denise. I also sent the budget records, the selective enforcement spreadsheet, and a formal request that all fines and fees related to the winter emergency zone be refunded immediately. The next morning, I got an email from the management company. It said the board had voted to suspend the winter emergency zone pending further review and that all related fines had been voided. It also said Michelle had requested a leave of absence from her position as election committee chair. Denise called me an hour later. She said the management company had admitted they backdated notices to trigger late fees faster, and that Michelle had been pressuring them to do it for over a year. She said the company was offering a settlement to avoid a class action lawsuit, and that the settlement included refunds for every homeowner who had been fined under the winter emergency protocol. She also said a recall petition had started circulating, and that it already had signatures from 40% of the neighborhood. I thought it was over. It was not over. 2 days later, I got a text from the gate vendor. He said he needed to come out and verify access logs because the management company had requested a full audit. I asked him why. He said someone had filed a complaint about unauthorized gate overrides and system tampering. I knew it was Michelle. I told him to come whenever he wanted. He showed up the next morning. He parked his van at the front entrance and ran diagnostics on the call box. I walked down to meet him. He was reading logs on a tablet. I asked him what he found. He said, "You are going to want to see this." He turned the tablet toward me. The log showed that my access code had been manually suspended 3 times in the past month, all 3 times by the same administrative account, and all 3 times outside of normal business hours. He scrolled down. The same account had also overridden the emergency exit protocol twice, both times during early morning hours when I would have been leaving for work. I asked him whose account it was. He said it was registered to the election committee chair. I asked him if he could print the logs. He said he already did. He handed me a printout. I asked him if the management company had seen this yet. He said no. They requested the audit, but he had not submitted the report. I asked him what he was going to put in the report. He said the truth. I took the printout to Denise. She made copies and sent them to the full board. That afternoon, the board called another emergency meeting. This time it was properly noticed, properly agendized, and Michelle was not invited to run it. The board president opened the meeting by reading the gate access logs into the minutes. He said the logs constituted evidence of harassment, abuse of administrative authority, and deliberate interference with a homeowner's access to the property. He said the board was referring the matter to the management company for disciplinary action and potential legal review. Michelle showed up anyway. She walked in halfway through the meeting, still carrying the snow pusher, and said the logs were fabricated and that the vendor was part of the conspiracy. The gate vendor was sitting in the back row. He stood up. He said, "I run diagnostics on this system every quarter, and I have backups going back 2 years. If you want to challenge the logs, I will pull every override you have ever made, and we can go through them one by one." Michelle stared at him. She did not say anything. She turned around and walked out. The board voted to remove her as election committee chair. They voted to refer the budget discrepancies to an independent auditor. And they voted to schedule a special election within 30 days to fill the vacant committee positions. Denise nominated herself. 2 other homeowners nominated themselves. Michelle did not. The recall petition hit the required threshold 4 days later. A special meeting turned into a recall vote. Michelle sent a group text calling it a witch hunt. 3 people replied telling her to resign. She did not resign. The vote happened anyway. She lost. 2 other board members resigned with her rather than face the audit. New leadership took over before the next storm hit. The management company refunded the snow-related fines and fees. They also refunded late fees, gate suspension charges, and towing authorization costs for every homeowner who had been targeted under the winter emergency protocol. The total refund was over $30,000. The independent auditor found an additional $12,000 in questionable vendor charges and recommended that the HOA pursue reimbursement from Michelle personally. The new board voted to file a claim. Michelle moved out 2 months later. She sold her unit and left the state. The snow pusher stayed behind, propped against the dumpster enclosure until someone finally threw it away. I still work early morning shifts at the gym. I still get up before dawn and drive through freezing rain and slush, But now the gate code works, the parking lot is clearly marked, and the HOA does not send certified letters threatening liens over imaginary violations. The laminated quiet hours notice is gone, the emergency zone is gone, and the election committee has 3 new members who actually read the bylaws before they vote. Denise is still on the architectural review committee. We get coffee sometimes, and she tells me stories about the old board meetings, the proxy fights, and the years when Michelle ran the neighborhood like a personal fiefdom. She says the recall was the best thing that ever happened to Cold Front Cove Ridge, and that the neighborhood finally feels like a community instead of a surveillance state. I keep the binder in my car. I keep the gate access logs in a folder on my phone. I do not think I will need them again, but I am not taking chances. If you live in an HOA and someone tries to invent a rule, get it in writing. If they refuse to provide documentation, record everything. And if they threaten your access, your job, or your home over a policy that does not exist, do not correct their lie. Let them commit to it in public. Then show up with proof and watch them walk out. Until next time, take care.